consistent marginal cost, then any profits above the usual come from being a monopoly, right? He second assumed all industries had a constant elasticity of 1, which lets you calibrate the relationship between the monopoly profits and the deadweight loss, because it ends up assuming a particular pass-through rate, right? So this allowed him to determine the size of the deadweight loss area based on the size of the abnormal profits. And third, he assumed that within a particular industry, there was no abnormal profits. Everyone within the industry was making exactly the same profits. All firms had the same monopoly power. And then he got data on the profitability of different industries from accounting information and so forth, and he compared this, and he determined the average degree of profitability, and then figured out that anyone who was above that was making monopoly profits and was creating some deadweight loss, according to this assumption. And he used this to back out the degree of excess profits, and therefore determine how much resources would have to be reallocated given this deadweight loss in order to eliminate the deadweight loss, and that allowed him to calculate the total amount of deadweight loss created by monopoly in the economy. And he found something very surprising that Vidor pointed out, which was that the total deadweight loss from monopoly was extremely small, about 1/10 of 1% of GDP. Absolutely tiny. And the basic reason is that the area of the triangle is usually small relative to the area of the square, of the rectangle, right? So imagine that monopoly elevates prices by 5% above the level that they should be at. Then the area of the deadweight loss triangle is going to be 0.05 squared, which is like 0.0025, right? So that's going to be tiny. So unless monopoly profits are huge in some areas, the amount of deadweight loss that causes is going to be very small. So if there's a lot of small monopoly distortions in a lot of industries, it's going to have very little impact. Only if there's giant monopoly distortions in some areas does it really make a difference. And an important implication of this is just because in economic theory we study monopoly distortions, and just because we talk about it, just because we talk about lots of things in this course, doesn't mean they actually matter in the size of those effects in the real world. Just because they could in principle matter, doesn't mean in practice they do matter. So it's really important that we not just think about things conceptually in this course, but that we actually try to think, well, how big is that effect? Does it actually matter, or is it just something that I came up with in the ivory tower, Nonetheless, even though I think that's a very important point in general, I think there was a lot of problems with Harberger's analysis. Does anyone see any of problems with the assumptions that he made? Yeah, what do you think, Bernard?
Well, there were 5 pages where we went on about problems with this. The one that I remember, they were generally below 1. The one was the highest one or something like that.
Yeah, so that would lead this to be an overestimate, but I think that it's a giant underestimate. Can you guys think of any reasons why it might be a giant underestimate? Hint 1 is related to problem 2 on your on problem set 2. Yeah.
Well, we assume that all the firms have constant returns to scale. Whereas I guess in monopoly, they have increasing returns to scale.
Yeah.
So they would produce more.
Yeah.
Output will be more.
What's your name?
Ethan.
Ethan.
With a less increasing cost.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So he assumed constant returns to scale, but monopoly most often arises when one firm can produce more efficiently than a lot of firms, right? And in that case, the deadweight loss is going to be much bigger for the reasons we talked about, right? If there is increasing returns, deadweight loss could be huge, right? So that's a big reason that he underestimated. Another reason, which is related to your problem set, is that we saw that because of Zipf's law, some firms in an industry are much bigger and much more profitable than the other firms in the industry, right? That's all within one particular industry. And he was assuming that all firms in the same industry make the exact same profits, right? So that's sort of wildly unrealistic, right? He was assuming that all the misallocations were happening because some industries were more profitable than other industries. But in reality, most of the differences in profitability are within an industry. That the best firms are much better than the worst firms, right? So like compare Apple computer to like Motorola or HTC or all these other companies that make tiny profits compared to what Apple makes, right? And so a huge amount of the misallocation is within industry, not across industry, and he completely ignores all of that. Similarly, the elasticity of demand, as Vidor pointed out, was very heterogeneous and not necessarily exactly equal to 1 everywhere. Nonetheless, I think we can still take some important broad lessons away from Harberger's work, which is one is that monopoly distortions exist, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they're large. I love antitrust policy. We're going to study it a lot in this course, but that's not necessarily the most important area of policy for the economy broadly. You should be skeptical and constantly question how important the things we talk about are, not just because we can show in some model that something arises doesn't mean it's a huge or important effect for the economy. As prices increase, initially the dead weight loss area may be very small, even though the firms can make significant profits. Right? Because one is a triangle and the other is like a rectangle. And what that means is that a bit of market power, but not full monopoly, may create large profits for the firm without creating too much dead weight loss. And so as we start to get some market power, first we create profits and then later we create dead weight loss. It's not like those things come at the same time. And so another thing that tells us, so in the analysis that we were doing, the only thing that mattered for the ratio of dead weight loss to monopoly profits was the pass-through rate, the curvature, not how competitive the industry was. But on the other hand, if we start from a very competitive situation and just start raising the price a bit, initially the dead weight loss area is very small, but the monopoly profits are large, right? So those things seem to be inconsistent with one another, and the key reason is that in a very competitive market, if I reduce my quantity, that primarily benefits the other people in the industry, not me. That primarily benefits my competitors who now get to make the profits on the amount that I'm not selling, rather than benefiting me who raises the price, because I have a real externality if they're selling more, and that means that the monopoly model really overestimates the amount of dead weight loss. Because the monopoly model says when I sell one more unit, that brings the benefit of the markup to society, right? But in reality, it also takes away the markups that my competitors are earning. If I, by selling more, reduce the quantity that they're selling, that doesn't bring the markup as a benefit to society. It brings the markup minus the markup that all my competitors are getting. And that means that the dead weight loss under the monopoly model is really a big overestimate in most cases of the actual dead weight loss. In fact, the dead weight loss could be negative. If the other firms all have a bigger markup than I do, and I increase my quantity and take away some of their sales, that could actually be harmful rather than beneficial. The overall externality could be negative. Finally, the primary impact of monopoly may not be the dead weight loss that it creates. Even though that's what we focused on, and we said, hey, look, the transfer of the monopoly, that's just a transfer. That transfer could be the main effect that monopoly power has. And we're going to come back to why that's so important in Lecture 13, because the profits that monopoly earn act as an incentive for the monopoly to get into the industry in the first place. And finally, details. Things that might seem like details, things that Harberger brushed over, may actually be really crucial for us measuring these types of effects. The heterogeneity of different firms in an industry, the exact structure of cost, those may be the most important things for us to measure. So we're done, but if you guys want to, we've got 10 minutes, if you want to ask questions about the midterm, we can do that. I can tell you what's on the midterm. Maybe